Stephanie Gables. That was the name of the young woman I had fed to the unspeakable evil that was Mr. Otis, dooming her to a slow and horrific death of entropy to sustain an eldritch horror who had accidentally sealed his soul inside of a jet black Pekingese dog. This is the kind of situation where you don't even want to tell anyone anymore. No one would possibly believe you, and you might end up in some kind of institution. I just stared at the security screen the entire night. I barely drank any of my coffee. I didn't eat my lunch. I just sat with my mouth drying up, staring at the camera that led to the second building walkway that led to Mrs. Gable's room. Angela came in about 15 minutes before her shift started and shuffled past me without saying hello first. She stuffed her bag behind the counter and got to brewing her coffee. And only when it was brewing and she had a cup and her cream and sugar ready did she turn around and fold her hands in front of her, taking a deep breath, as if for both of us, and finally met my eyes. "So," she sighed, "how was your first night alone? Did you have to talk to any—" She paused and left the air pregnant, hoping that a long enough silence would allow me to get on the same page with her that she was trying to ask about. "Did you need to talk to any regulars?" she eventually stammered out. Angela was a very small, skinny woman. She was about 5'4", and since it's not polite to talk about a woman's weight, I'll just say that if you shook her hand, you would be afraid of breaking it. She had the same pale skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes that Johnny had, and it wasn't until after getting to know the two of them that they seemed to look very similar. Like they could almost be from the same family, but not similar enough to be mistaken for siblings. She was very kind, and I was very happy that for the most part she would be the only person I would talk to on a regular basis, with how everyone's schedule would work out. She was such an angel. To answer her question, I held up the envelope that had Mr. Otis's name on it, and she actually sighed a breath of what seemed like relief. "Oh, good, that's not too bad. Which room did you send him to?" The casual nature of what she said almost traumatized me all over again. I couldn't even respond. I just stood there slack-jawed for long enough for her to gather herself and try again. "Listen, I know it's a lot to take in, but there isn't any getting around Mr. Harrod and his ways." She stepped closer and put a dainty hand on my shoulder and made eye contact with me. "It's really not that bad. You'll get used to it. Just remember, we don't have a choice." She squeezed my arm and kept her stare serious. I knew she wasn't threatening me. She was just as terrified of the situation as I was. I nodded and told her which room, and she told me everything would be taken care of and that I shouldn't think too much about it. That I should just think of it as doing my job. If ever there was a time to leave, this was it. I didn't say anything to anyone, I didn't warn Angela or even call my dad. I got back to my room and I started packing up my things and even decided to leave most of my other possessions that I could afford to replace. I could get new towels, I could get new clothes. I needed to just get as far away from this place as I possibly could, as quietly as I could. I gathered together the most important essentials and ordered an Uber from my phone, but before I could stand to put my shoes on and wait for it, the order canceled. I thought maybe whoever it was assigned to decided they didn't want to take me, so I looked down at my phone and made sure the app hadn't charged me and ordered again. And again, the order immediately, almost automatically, canceled itself, as if I had pressed the button. I checked my connection to the internet, my phone's data plan. I even tried calling the customer support for Uber, but every time it just canceled the call before it could even ring. Without trying to look too far into it, I changed my strategy and went to Google and looked up when the next bus would arrive. But the screen was just stuck on loading. The same way it would if you didn't have internet and no Wi-Fi connection hooked up to your phone. Well, fine, I thought to myself. I knew when the next bus would arrive at a stop close to the motel and went to go meet it. I walked the usual route I had developed to a gas station to get whatever I could to eat after a long shift at the hotel, and my intention was just to keep walking past the gas station to the next stop. The hotel was on a street corner and was perched on top of a hill that had a steep driveway leading up to it with only one entrance to the parking lot from the front. Walking out of the parking lot exit, I took a right to follow the sidewalk to the gas station, taking a detour behind a second hotel that was across the street, which had a large rock wall behind the hotel, which was on the other side of the hotel's back parking lot. This lot opened immediately into the gas station lot. It all seemed too simple, and I was already reminding myself to delete and block phone numbers so none of these lunatics could ever find me again. When I turned the corner, however, my heart sank. There, at the closest gas pump at the station to where I would have come out from the direction I was going, was Johnny, standing next to his old repurposed police interceptor, looking right my way. As soon as he saw me, his hand shot up and a big smile stretched across his face. He stopped me and was beaming about having unexpectedly run into me. He was sweating, and even though I thought I had slipped away unnoticed, I couldn't deny that the place was covered with cameras and it would be easy to see me leaving. It wasn't a terrible surprise to see him there trying to cut me off, but it certainly wasn't a coincidence. I played along with his small talk and denied his offer to get a ride back to the hotel after buying whatever I needed from the gas station. I told him I had plans to go to a grocery store farther away, and he offered to drive me there instead. I winced at his persistence and tried to tell him I was going to take a very long time and that I wouldn't want to bore him by making him wait for me all day, and he responded that he had all day and all the time in the world. But the way he said it made him look strained, like the kind of look someone gets when they're in pain and they are impatiently waiting for their pain medicine to kick in. Like he was waiting for me to finally understand something that he couldn't tell me. I finally pretended to agree to the ride back and went into the store, but slipped out the back of the store after making up a story to the clerk about owing someone some money and wanting to be able to spend it on the store instead of paying it back, and he happily let me out the back door. Thinking I had finally given Johnny the slip, I walked behind another alleyway to emerge onto a cross street that had a bus stop I was familiar with, all the while checking my phone and trying to get the bus directions to load. But even though I was current on my phone plan, none of the information would come up. Eventually, the bus did come, but when I got on board, I was met with the sickening smell of Mr. Harrod's cigarettes again. I told myself I was just imagining it, and that the stress of the experience was still fresh in my mind, and that the farther away I got, the better I would feel. I stepped onto the bus and got my pass out to wave in front of the scanner when I looked up to the driver, only for him to be staring back at me with milky, clouded-over eyes. He wore no expression and didn't say anything to me, but he didn't take his eyes off of me either. I stood there frozen, eyes locked on his expressionless stare for what felt like hours. When it became clear that I wasn't going to be murdered on the spot, and that he wasn't going to say anything to me, I simply swiped my pass and moved onto the bus to find a seat. I knew what was going on. As I turned, I saw that a handful of passengers that were already on the bus all were also staring at me with the same milky stare. No one moved or even seemed to breathe, but they all held that awful, blank stare and never looked away from me. I picked a seat and sat petrified as I watched the driver awkwardly turn to keep his eyes on me as I sat down on the seat. Then, his shoulders turning, a sickening snap coming from his neck, to face the front again. The doors closed, and the bus began to move. I didn't dare to turn to make eye contact with anyone, but I knew that every soul on that bus was still watching me, eyes boring into the back and sides of my head. This was as clear a message as ever could be sent. I watched out the window and recognized that the bus was rounding the next corner in the wrong direction, and the bus circled around the block and took me right back to the hotel, stopping with the door open towards the driveway. A long moment passed before I gave up and stood to exit the bus. As I got off the bus, I received no acknowledgement from the driver, and the doors simply closed and the bus drove off, presumably to return to its regular route as I walked back up the driveway. I saw Mr. Harrod and Johnny standing outside the lobby, and Mr. Harrod was smoking one of his cigarettes. He smiled and nodded to me as I passed, casually extinguishing the cigarette on Johnny's shoulder and placing the butt back in that silver case. Johnny didn't even react. He just kept his eyes on the ground to avoid looking at him or me. I walked back to my room to try to get some sleep for my shift that night. Clearly, I wasn't going anywhere.